In 1647, Elsie Young of Windsor, Connecticut, was the first recorded instance of an execution for witchcraft in the 13 American colonies. She was around 32 years old when she was hung. These witch trials and executions came over from Europe, with the events from Salem, Massachusetts in the 1690s being the most infamous. And not a lot of people know that the last witch trials also happened in a town near Salem. It's called the Ipswich Witchcraft Trial that happened in 1878, but the judge dismissed the case. And that brings me to the last person convicted of witchcraft in North America. This happened in Virginia and involved a woman named Grace White Sherwood, who is sometimes called the Witch of Pungo. But first, a thing about witches in the colony of Virginia at that time. The existence of witches was taken for granted by the American colonists, and witchcraft was considered the work of the devil. Nevertheless, Virginia did not experience events of mass hysteria like the Salem witch trials. The church's influence on the courtroom was much less a factor in Virginia, where the clergy rarely participated in witchcraft trials, unlike in New England, where ministers took an active part. People's fears of witchcraft in Virginia were not based on their religious beliefs as much as they were rooted in folklore, although the two often intermingled. New England's Puritans had settled in towns, and community pressure helped contribute to witchcraft conviction. There were less of these types of towns in Virginia, where most of the population lived on farms which were scattered over a large area. Virginia's religious leaders were more interested in prosecuting offenses such as gossip, slander, and fornication, seeing them as threats to social stability. Virginia courts were reluctant to hear accusations of witchcraft, unlike the Salem witch trial courts, where the accused had to prove their innocence. In Virginia courts, the accuser carried the burden of proof. Also, Virginia courts usually ignored evidence said to have been obtained by supernatural means. Judges would dismiss unsubstantiated cases of witchcraft and allow the accusers to be sued for slander. Although few Virginia records survive from that era, 19 known witchcraft cases were brought in that colony during the 17th century. All but one ended in acquittal. The one conviction was a 1656 case of a man convicted of witchcraft, but there were no executions for witchcraft in Virginia. Although ducking was allowed. Ducking was immersing the acquitted while bound in water. It was believed that as water was considered pure, it would reject witches, causing them to float, whereas the innocent would sink. But this appears to have been used only once, and that was on Grace Sherwood. Around 1736, Virginia's justices of the peace were reminded that witchcraft was still a crime, and that first offenders could expect to be pilloried and jailed. Grace White was born in Virginia in 1660, probably in Pungo, which is now the Norfolk and Virginia Beach area. In 1680, Grace married a small farm landowner named James Sherwood, and they had 3 sons. No drawings or paintings of Grace exist, but some accounts describe her as attractive, tall, and possessing a sense of humor. Grace wore trousers instead of a dress while working on her farm. This was unusual for that time, as was her growing of herbs for medicine. Her good looks and demeanor was said to attract men and upset their wives. The first accusation against her came in 1697. Richard Capps alleged that she had used a spell to cause the death of his bull. The court made no decision, and the Sherwoods filed a defamation suit against Capps that was resolved by a settlement. In 1698, Grace was accused by her neighbor, John Gisburn, of enchanting his pigs and cotton crop. No court action followed this accusation, and another suit for defamation by the Sherwoods failed. In the same year, Elizabeth Barnes alleged that Grace had assumed the form of a black cat, entered Barnes's home, jumped over her bed, drove and whipped her, and left via a keyhole. Again, the allegation was unresolved, and a subsequent defamation suit was lost. For each of these accusations, Grace and her husband had to pay court-related costs. In January 1706, the Hills accused Grace of witchcraft. And in February, the court ordered her to appear on a charge of having bewitched Elizabeth Hill, causing a miscarriage. In March, the Princess Anne County Justices sought to impanel 2 juries, both made up of women. The first was ordered to search Grace's home for waxen or baked figures that might indicate she was a witch. The second was ordered to look for demon-suckling teats by examining her. In both instances, reluctance on the part of the local residents made it difficult to form a jury. Then in March 1706, Grace was examined by a jury of 12 ancient and knowing women who were appointed to look for markings on her body that might be brands of the devil. They discovered 2 marks that were said not like theirs or like those of any other woman. The 4th woman on this jury was the same woman who had formerly accused her of witchcraft. Neither the colonial authorities in Williamsburg nor the local court in Princess Anne were willing to declare Grace a witch. Those in Williamsburg considered the charge overly vague, and in April instructed the local court to examine the case more fully. In May 1706, the county justices noted that while no particular act of maleficarum, which is Latin for witches, had been alleged against Grace, there was great cause of suspicion. So the sheriff took her into custody. Maximilian Bush, a warden of Lynnhaven Parish Church, was the prosecutor in Grace's case. That July, the justices ordered a trial by ducking to take place with Grace's consent. She was taken inside Lynnhaven Parish Church, placed on a stool in order to ask for forgiveness for her witchery. She replied, "I be not a witch, I be a healer." On July 10, 1706, Grace was taken down a dirt road to a plantation near the mouth of the river. News had spread, and the event attracted people from all over the colony, who began to shout, "Duck the witch." But it was not intended for Grace to drown. The court had ordered that care be taken to preserve her life. 5 women of the Lynnhaven Parish Church examined Grace's naked body on the shoreline for any devices she might have to free herself, and then covered her with a sack. 6 of the justices that had ordered the ducking rode in one boat 200 yards out in the river, and in another were the sheriff, the magistrate, and Grace. Just before she was pushed off the boat, Grace is said to have stated, "Before this day be through, you will all get a worse ducking than I." Bound, her right thumb to her left big toe and her left thumb to her right big toe, she was cast into the river and quickly floated to the surface. The sheriff then tied a 13-pound Bible around her neck. This caused her to sink, but she untied herself and returned to the surface, convincing many spectators that she was a witch. As Grace was pulled out of the water, a downpour reportedly started, drenching the onlookers. Several women who again examined her for additional proof found 2 marks on her that were black in color. She was jailed pending further proceedings. What happened to Grace after the ducking is unclear, as many of the court proceedings have been lost during that time. She served an unknown time in jail next to Lynnhaven Parish Church, perhaps as long as 7 years. She appears to have been released around 1714. She lived the remainder of her life quietly until her death in 1740 at around 80 years old. According to legend, Grace's sons put her body near the fireplace, and a wind came down the chimney. Her body disappeared amid the embers, with the only clue being a cloven hoof print. She lies in an unmarked grave under some trees in a field near the intersection of Pungo Ferry Road and Princess Anne Road in Virginia Beach. Stories about the devil taking her body, unnatural storms, and the loitering black cats quickly arose after her death. Her home stood for over 200 years, but after being burned several times by vandals, it was bulldozed in 2002. The property is now owned by the federal government as part of the Back Bay National Wildlife Refuge. A statue depicting Grace with a raccoon and a basket of rosemary was unveiled in 2007 near the Centara Bayside Hospital, which is close to the sites of both the Colonial Courthouse and the Ducking Point. The raccoon represents her love of animals, and the rosemary her knowledge of herbal healing. A Virginia Department of Historical Resources marker was erected in 2002 near her statue. The place of her ducking has been named Witch Duck Bay and Witch Duck Point. In 2014, a memorial marker was placed at an herb garden at the Old Donation Episcopal Church, Grace's former parish church, which is in Virginia Beach. A local legend states that all the rosemary grown around there came from a single plant Grace carried in an eggshell. The Virginia governor granted an informal pardon to officially restore the good name of Grace Sherwood on July 10, 2006, the 300th anniversary of her conviction. According to local legends, a strange moving light, said to be Grace's restless spirit, still appears each July over the spot in Witch Duck Bay where she was thrown into the water. And that's the story of Grace Sherwood, the last convicted witch. May she rest in peace. And as a side note, Elsie Young, who I started this off with, was formally exonerated in 2017 by a vote from the Windsor, Connecticut Town Council. Good night.